before I get to tonight's conference, we are able to dedicate some new enhanced capabilities here. As you can see on your screen, we are now here in high def. So interesting enough, you all watching won't necessarily notice as much, but those at home will. And those who can be beamed in here, we will notice that capability. The story of this building is a great story. We have Ann Getches here, who, as most people here know, was the partner with David Getches through a wonderful and really spectacular set of events and leadership on his part, along with others, that helped us get this building. Not only having students on this campus tax themselves, which is a key part of this story, but also having thought go into creating a building that was sustainable. And the amount of thought that David put in on that was really special. And like many things, his partner was the chair of the building committee, Charles Wilkinson. And together, they worked hard on this building. And one of the conversations they had was with another great natural resources alum, John Whittemire, who's here today. And John said he didn't really want the courtroom to have each chair, as happens in some environments, to get sold off to the highest bidder. He wanted to dedicate the courtroom and have it be a place that would be a real shining star in our law school's experience. And it was really and remains a spectacular accomplishment. What we're celebrating today with John, his wife Nancy, and with an adopted alum, Gordon Gam, is a new video and sound equipment, which, as I said, is in high def and will make the quality of what's happening with the live streaming much better, and will also enable us here to bring others in and bring experiences in. And our wonderful IT team, John Sibre is the leader, Rex Head is our IT director and assistant director, Chris Evans, Guido, I'm going to get Guido's last name here wrong here, Sessions, Eric Roster, and Billy Shriners. They're really a first-rate group who worked long and hard to make this upgrade work, and they've actually been able to put together a video that I want to show you. So without further ado, let's hit it, Rex. So, can you join me in thanking John and Nancy Whittemire and Gordon and Grace Graham for their generosity? And in Gordon's case, as I said, he is an adopted alum who had a feeling, not unlike Lance Estrella sitting right near him, that this law school plays an important role in our community, and he wants to be a part of supporting it. And that literally, to me, came out of nowhere, and want to be part of this project. And Gordon, we look forward to involving you, as we do alums like John and adopted alums like Lance. This is a community, and it's appropriate to have the celebration at this event, which for many people feels like a family reunion, given how many connections there are. I can't do justice to all the connections here. I very much appreciate how all of you are such valuable parts of our community. What I want to start with, and he's not here right now, but his good friend and colleague Howard Boygan is here, is how this event started. And I have to say, I have the disadvantage of having never met Clyde Martz, but I did hear that he shares my fondness for multitasking in what is an unfortunate story that I can kind of relate to. He apparently was once in the Capitol walking down the steps while reading a brief and tripped and came in the next day and was teaching his course on crutches. Apparently he also was known for working on briefs while driving 36. And I will say I don't go that far, although in the journal that we have, the Tech Journal, they do give out a Wiser Multitasking Award. So he was really a special figure, and part of what made him so special was how he was able to engage and be respected by so many different people in academia, in civil society, in government, in practice and industry. He kind of did it all over the course of his career, and that career started here. He apparently didn't know anything about natural resources before he was invited to join this faculty, and when asked, what do I teach? He was told, we need someone to teach natural resources law, and he said, well, what's that exactly? And they said, well, you'll have to figure it out. And apparently there was no book at the time, so he did figure it out and wrote the first book. Stan Dempsey may have taken a course from Clyde when he was here as a student, and he taught a whole generation of students, and then he went to practice where he had a generation of mentees, including, as I mentioned, Brian Dolan and Howard Boygan, and he served in government as well numerous times, including the last time with Zach Miller, who's here and at the same firm that Howard was once at and Clyde was at, Davis, Graham, and Stubbs. And Brian and Howard and Davis, Graham, and Stubbs and Zach and others have wanted to underwrite in Clyde's memory a symposium that would be held every year and bring together people across the spectrum that he worked in and bring together leading figures in policy, civil society, academia, and industry. And that was a tall order that we were given. And so we put together a planning committee, which included many people here, John Echo Hawk, William Boyd, Charles Wilkinson, and we worked hard to come up with an agenda that would do justice. And I want to touch on some of the people who were really critical. There are a number of students who worked on this effort. They worked with someone who is a research fellow who took this on. I don't think he'd organized a conference like this before. Where's Dietrich Hoffman? So Dietrich took the lead of a team, and I won't be able to acknowledge them all now, but it's an amazing group. And he did yeoman's work while doing another job. Now, he hasn't started yet looking for his next job, but someone who's looking for a talented lawyer who is high value, very low maintenance, a pleasure to work with, very smart, he's your man. Talk to him in the reception. And I mean that heartily. Dietrich, thank you so much for your leadership in this. We have a number of sponsors who wanted to support the symposium. We've listed them in the brochure: Davis, Graham, and Stubbs, Newmont Mining, the Energy Bar Association, the Colorado Petroleum Association. We have a number of sponsors for the Energy Innovation Initiative that's partnering this with the Getchell Wilkins Center. They're listed as well. It's really taken a lot of people to make this work. And here's the thing. The first time you do something is the hardest. And the good news is this is the inaugural Martz Symposium. Next year, with the great leadership of the executive director of the Getchell Wilkins Center, there's already talk about how they're going to put together something that will be a blockbuster. To both say a little bit about this event and some of the thoughts behind it is a key person who helped shape it and who's been the leader of the Energy Innovation Initiative I just mentioned, Professor William Boyd.
Thanks, Phil. Let me just say a few things about the conference, and then I want to add some thank yous of my own before turning it over to Britt Banks, the new executive director of the Getchell Wilkinson Center for Natural Resources, Energy, and the Environment. The premise of the conference, when we sort of sat down to hash this out and think about it over maybe 7, 8 months ago, was that natural resource industries, that is, those industries that provide energy, water, fiber, and raw materials to a growing world economy, are a critical part, maybe the critical part of the sustainability challenge. And we felt like a focus on that sector, those industries, was an appropriate way to try to honor the legacy of Clyde Martz. I, of course, unfortunately did not know Clyde Martz either, but he is quite a legend in these halls. A key observation that motivated the thinking around the conference was that there is an ongoing revolution, and I don't use that term lightly, an ongoing revolution in corporate social responsibility, and more generally in the efforts by businesses across multiple sectors to make sustainability a key part of their operations. That's very real, it's happening, and it's much more than just compliance issues. We've moved, I think, or are in the process of moving from thinking about sustainability in companies from compliance or even marketing to how do we actually integrate this into the core of our operations, into our very brand and identity. And now that varies across different sectors, but I think that was an observation that was motivating our focus. And then the question that drops out of the premise and the observation is, well, what does this mean in the traditional natural resource industries? That is, how are firms in these industries working to engage and operationalize sustainability? It's one thing to say, or it's one thing for Google or Microsoft or even Wal-Mart to embrace sustainability and make it a core part of their operations. It is, I would submit, an altogether different proposition for companies in the mining, timber, and oil and gas industries, and of course for the communities in which they operate to make sustainability work on the ground. And so this conference is really intended to focus specifically on the sustainability challenge in these traditional natural resource industries, asking how firms in these sectors are moving from concept to action on sustainability and taking a hard look at some of the more important challenges and also some of the opportunities that they're confronting as part of that effort. And in doing so, of course, we can only scratch the surface. This is obviously a huge topic that deserves much more attention than we can give it here. We will surely revisit it in the future. So I want to just say a couple of things about the conference itself and then a few thank yous, and I'll turn it over to Britt. Senator Bingaman will kick off the event tonight with his keynote address, Reflections on the Sustainability Challenge. We are delighted to have him back here in Colorado. He gave the Schultz Lecture on Energy last year. Britt Banks will introduce the senator in a moment. We'll start off tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with an all-star roundtable discussion with Ken Salazar, Gail Norton, Mike Connor, and Dave Freudenthal on what a sustainability agenda might look like for natural resource industries with particular attention to the American West. You do not want to miss that roundtable discussion. We'll then go to our first panel on the history of the idea of sustainability, and the goal here is to provide some historical context for the conference, focusing on the various strands of thinking that have come together to give meaning to the concept of sustainability and how it's changed over time and across different domains. Our second panel will drill down on the challenges of operationalizing sustainability in natural resource industries, focusing on trends and best practices across these industries, the changing role of chief sustainability officers, the role of multi-stakeholder processes and new models of governance. And then our third panel will focus specifically on the community dimensions of resource extraction and development, here and abroad, with particular attention to emerging norms such as social license to operate and free and prior informed consent, asking what these actually mean on the ground and how they're informing and structuring some of the interactions between natural resource industries and communities. This will then set the agenda very nicely for an Oxford-style debate, and this was an idea that Mark Squillace had. It's a brilliant idea. That debate will be on the issue of state versus local control over oil and gas development, obviously a very timely topic here on the Front Range. Howard Boygan will moderate that debate between Barbara Green and David Neslin. And then finally, we will have some closing remarks from John Mork, the CEO of the Energy Corporation of America. We're very happy to have him back here at the law school. Now, before I turn it over to Britt, I just want to add some thank yous. First to Dean Phil Weiser. His vision and drive, and anyone who knows him knows about his incredible drive. Fondness for multitasking is a ridiculous understatement. His commitment to this law school, that made this event happen, and the rest of us have basically been trying to keep up the whole time. Dietrich Hoffner, I want to echo Phil's thanks to Dietrich, our Energy Innovation Fellow. He may be the only person in the building that's been able to keep up with Phil over the last 6 months or so and has been absolutely essential in pulling off the conference. Charles Wilkinson, one of our center's two namesakes, and really the heart and soul of our whole program here at Colorado Law. We will hear from him tomorrow in the first panel when he delivers a talk entitled, "The Greatest Good of the Greatest Number in the Long Run, TR, Pinchot, and the Origins of Sustainability in America." It will be a special treat. Britt Banks, our new executive director, proud alum of Colorado Law, a student in Charles's first natural resources field seminar in the late 1950s, was that? He has deep experience in the natural resources sector, having served in various high-level executive positions at Newmont Mining, and since retiring has been a real leader in the global discourse around sustainable practices in the mining industry. We are very lucky and very excited to have him on board as the new director of the Getches Wilkinson Center. Howard Boygan and Brian Dolan, who, as the dean said, really pushed for this event as a way to honor Clyde Martz. They've been deeply involved in planning and supporting the event. The planning committee and the rest of our faculty in natural resources, energy, and environmental law, Lakshman Guruswamy, Mark Squillace, Sarah Krakoff, and Kristen Carpenter, whom we have adopted, at least temporarily, from the Indian law program. Our Getches Wilkinson Center Advisory Council, we just had a meeting with the Advisory Council. Thank you all for your patience and support as we've launched the new center. And Getches and the whole Getches family for all of your support. We hope that David would be proud of us. Our sponsors, as Phil mentioned, the Energy Bar Association, Davis, Graham and Stubbs, Newmont Mining, the Renewable and Sustainable Energy Institute, and the Colorado Petroleum Association, the truly amazing group of participants and panelists that we have for the conference, and you, the audience, thank you for coming. The panel discussions tomorrow will be quite interactive, so we do very much want to hear from you. And of course, finally, our keynotes, Senator Bingaman, who will kick things off tonight, and John Mork, who will close tomorrow evening. I do want to thank very briefly some of the staff and volunteers who've helped to make this happen. Staff Jackie Shee, Carrie Ungama, Rex Head, Anna Nascazi, and Sean Labar. Two outside volunteers that showed up to help us, Teresa Foster and Vince Calvano. And then last but not least, the small army of students who have worked on the event, Jolie Dinkinger, Tarn Udall, Sarah Judkins, Braden Johnson, Matt Nikyle, Eli Jemerson, Matt Holub, Michelle Callahan, Cabell Massey, Alan Holcomb, and Megan Goodwin. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, and my apologies for those I forgot. A number of other students will be here over the course of the next day. Please spend some time with our students. They're as good as Dietrich is. They're amazing. They're also looking for work. And for those of you that are in a position to hire, you really can't go wrong hiring a student from Colorado Law. So with that, I want to turn it over to Britt Banks, the Executive Director of the Getches Wilkinson Center for Natural Resources, Energy, and the Environment.
Thank you very much. As Phil said, it does seem like a family setting here. I see a lot of old friends from way back. I also see a lot of people I hope will be new friends over the course of the next couple of days. So I look forward to getting to know all of you. I've been on the job now for about a month. It's been a crazy time, but a very enjoyable and engaging time. The center, the Getches Wilkinson Center, of course, evolved out of the Natural Resources Law Center, but now includes within its purview all of the faculty members and all the research staff within the university who are working on natural resources, energy, and environmental issues. And it's been really exciting to see how that group has come together and how a lot of the individual strands of research and academic thought leadership within the university are coming together within this group. So I think we'll have a lot of exciting events and projects and workshops and conversations to come. But of course, this is the first, and that's why it's especially exciting for the center. And we're very happy to have you all here. And we're very lucky to kick this event off by having a very distinguished speaker to offer the keynote address. And that, of course, as has been mentioned, is Senator Jeff Bingaman of the great state and neighboring state of New Mexico, which is certainly one of my favorite places to visit in planet Earth, I think. Senator Bingaman has a very distinguished career in the U.S. Senate. He served there for 30 years. During that time, he was involved in some of the major pieces of environmental and energy legislation that were adopted by the Congress. He served for many years as the chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and he has a tremendous amount of expertise to share with us as we embark on our 2 days of thinking about the issue of sustainability and how it plays into the extractive industries. So with that, please welcome Senator Jeff Bingaman.
All right, that's supposed to be working. Can you hear me? All right, thank you very much. Let me thank the Dean, Dean Weiser, for roping me in on this. He's a very far-sighted, energetic, visionary leader, and when he calls you 3 months before an event, there's no way to say no. And I very much appreciate being invited to be part of the symposium and to be back here at the University of Colorado Law School. Before I get into any kind of discussion of the issue, let me first acknowledge one of your distinguished alumni who was confirmed today by the U.S. Senate as the Deputy Secretary of Interior, Mike Connor. Mike, stand up and take a bow. I'm advised that the vote was 97-0. That's the kind of unified work that the Senate is famous for these days, and so Mike must have found the secret ingredients to get it done. The subject of this symposium is a very large one, very challenging one. The sustainability challenge, I think that probably means different things to each person in this room. A threshold question is, what are we talking about when we talk about sustainability in this context? So the first thing I did when I started trying to figure out what I might say here is to look this up in the dictionary. Merriam-Webster's dictionary says that to sustain is to provide what is needed for something to exist or to continue. And that captures some of what I think this symposium is intended to focus on, but to put a sharper point on the issue, I believe that most of us are here to discuss the activities and practices that are employed in the natural resource industries to use and exploit our natural resources, and to make some judgments about which of those activities and practices are sustainable and which of those activities and practices are unsustainable. To my mind, there are at least three main ways, and you may be able to add to this list, and perhaps that'll happen tomorrow. I hope it does. But there are at least three main ways that activities and practices can be identified as unsustainable. And I put them on a chart here, so let me I'll try to put that up. I hope you can read it from the back. In my view, at least, the way I'm thinking about it, an activity is unsustainable if the activity causes unacceptable damage to humans or to the environment. That's a very general statement, but I think one that's reasonably true. Second, an activity is unsustainable if it uses up or destroys a valuable resource. Third, an activity is unsustainable if it causes an unacceptable shortage of a valuable resource. And I'm sure that most of you can think of examples in each of these categories. What I'll do in my comments here over the next few minutes is to discuss a few examples of unsustainable activities and practices that occur to me in two sectors of our industry. And that is, first of all, talking about examples of unsustainable activities related to energy production and use. And second, talking about examples of what I would consider unsustainable activities related to the use of water. So first, energy. In the case of energy, we have a national debate going on about what our objectives are. As far as I can tell, most Americans subscribe to the notion that we should pursue at least two objectives. And those two objectives are that we need to have abundant energy to meet all of our needs, the needs of our economy. Second, we need to have affordable energy. And I don't believe that we have a legitimate national debate about either of those questions. I think virtually everybody agrees we need abundant, affordable energy. The debate, and as I see it, is instead about whether, in addition to having sources of energy that are abundant and affordable, we should also have as an objective ensuring that the activities and practices that we engage in meeting our energy needs are sustainable. The overwhelming evidence, at least to my mind, is that at least when you look at this on a global basis, the activities and practices we engage in today to meet our energy needs are not sustainable. Of course, here I'm talking about the problem of climate change. Climate change in 2014, any meaningful discussion of sustainability has to grapple with the fact that worldwide, we and others cause about 90 million tons of CO2 to enter the atmosphere every day. Until 2006, the United States was the largest producer of those emissions, of those 90 million tons of CO2. In 2006, that changed. Now the Chinese are substantially ahead of us as the largest emitter of greenhouse gases and CO2 more specifically. They produce about 50% more than we do. They're expected to in this year of 2014. Since this CO2 can enter the atmosphere in a single day, but requires decades or even centuries in some circumstances to settle out, we are clearly, to my mind, adding CO2 to the atmosphere at what I would call an unsustainable rate. Of course, the problem is primarily the result of the way we produce and use energy. Something in the range of 90% of man-made greenhouse gases result from the ways that we produce and distribute and use energy. The increase in CO2 in the atmosphere has been well documented. Here, I have a chart to show you here. So those of you who've been studying greenhouse gas issues and climate change are very familiar with this. This is the Keeling curve, it's called. It's named after David Keeling. He was a postdoc at Scripps Institute of Oceanography. In 1958, he began measuring atmospheric CO2 at the station on top of Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And as early as 1963, based on Keeling's work, the National Science Foundation issued its first warnings on global warming. The NSF, in a report issued in 63, pointed out that increased CO2 in the atmosphere would have the effect of reducing the amount of solar energy the Earth could re-radiate back into space, and that this would lead to gradual warming of the atmosphere. Now, the consequences of these increased levels of CO2 have been the subject of a great deal of scientific analysis since Keeling began his work. They've also been the subject of a tremendous amount of political debate. The scientific analysis concludes that in the coming years we can expect to see less precipitation in dry areas of the globe, leading to increased frequency and intensity and size of forest fires, more precipitation in wet areas of the globe, leading to increased flooding, reduced snowpack in winter, earlier runoff and less water for irrigation in the spring and summer, a resurgence of insects such as the bark beetle that we've seen devastate our forests in the Rocky Mountains, a die-off of conifers in the southern Rocky Mountains, a die-off of many species worldwide because they find that they are unable to adapt to the changed conditions warmer and more acidic oceans, loss of ice in the Antarctic and Greenland, increased flooding in coastal areas around the world, and I could go on with this list. But the logical way to reduce the long-term damage that I've mentioned is to change the activities and methods we employ to meet our energy needs. That is, we need to find ways to meet our energy needs that do not add to the problem of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. This in turn means we will have to achieve a political consensus that sustainability, the subject of this symposium, in the way that we meet our energy needs to be added to our national objectives. So I won't spend more time rehashing the debate about climate change, except to say that finding and adopting sustainable methods to meet our energy needs to be priority one for ourselves and for the rest of the world. In addition to recognizing the overall need to reduce CO2 emissions going into the atmosphere, we should also recognize there are particular activities and practices related to energy production that are clearly unsustainable as well. One such activity is the large-scale venting and flaring of natural gas that is occurring worldwide and also here in our own country. Large-scale venting and flaring of natural gas is a worldwide problem. So first, let me talk about worldwide flaring of natural gas. Satellite images taken from space at night show clearly the many areas where flaring is occurring. The extent of the flaring in Russia and in Nigeria is particularly noticeable in these images. In 2011, it's estimated that 138 billion cubic meters of gas were flared worldwide. Now, since we're more familiar with cubic feet than we are with cubic meters, I thought I would try to translate this 138 billion cubic meters into cubic feet. Each cubic meter equals 35.3 cubic feet, so we're really talking about 4,871 billion cubic feet of natural gas in 2011. Let me now say a word about venting. There are no good statistics that I'm aware of on the extent of the venting that is occurring, venting of natural gas that's occurring. However, we do know that natural gas releases to the atmosphere that is released to the atmosphere without flaring is much more efficient in trapping heat in the atmosphere than is the CO2 that results from the flaring. A quantity of natural gas that's vented will add about 20 times as much to the problem of global warming as an equal amount of gas that is flared. In the 2 years since the 2011 statistics were released or were gathered, the amount of venting and flaring has undoubtedly increased. With the revolution in shale gas and shale oil very much on us today, the expectation for major increases in drilling activity in future years is very real, and that increased drilling activity will almost certainly result in increased venting and flaring as well, unless policies can be adopted to limit the practice. Now let's talk a little about our own country. In our own country, the state where the increase in oil and gas drilling has been the most dramatic is North Dakota. Here's a graph that shows what's happened to natural gas production in the state of North Dakota in recent years, since 2002 up until June of 2013. You can see that the increase in natural gas production has been dramatic. The graph also shows there's been an increase in the amount of natural gas sold. But the gas sold has not kept up with the gas produced. As you can see, the gap between the two lines continues to widen on this graph. This next chart is taken something I took just from the internet. It's the figures published by the North Dakota Pipeline Authority for 2012 for gas produced and gas sold, first from the Bakken Formation, and then from all North Dakota formations, including the Bakken. I think it's a fair assumption that gas that's produced but not sold is either vented or flared. And in the way I interpret the figures that we have here, over a third of the gas produced in North Dakota in 2012 was either vented or flared. To my mind, that is not a sustainable situation or a sustainable practice. I understand there are economic reasons why it may make good sense for an individual producer to produce, capture, and sell the oil because the price of oil is high, and to go ahead and vent or flare the natural gas because the price of natural gas is not that high. But that does not mean that doing so should be considered a sustainable practice. To their credit, the industry engaged in drilling in North Dakota have announced a voluntary program to reduce venting and flaring in the state over the next 6 years. They've indicated a goal of reducing the amount of venting and flaring to no more than 10% of the gas being produced in the state by 2020. However, even with that, legitimate questions can be raised about whether the plan that they've announced is an adequate response to the problem. Legitimate questions can also be raised about whether federal and state managers have done all they should or could to control and limit these practices. My understanding is that the BLM still operates on the basis of regulations first put into effect in 1980 on this issue, 34 years ago. On a related issue, and I'm sure many of you in the room know more about this than I do, but your own Colorado Air Quality Resources Commission and Governor Hickenlooper have announced new regulations to address the leaking of methane from oil and gas operations. And certainly from all I've read, they are to be commended for that announcement. However, the new regulations that have been announced, as I understand it, are focused primarily on reducing methane emissions resulting unintentionally from oil and gas operations. They are not focused that directly on the intentional venting and flaring of natural gas. I believe the governor has directed the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission to begin updating its rules on the issue of flaring of natural gas, and I hope that is also a successful effort. The second issue that I wanted to, let me first just go back to this other chart that I started with here and say that everything I've talked about so far pretty much falls in the first category. Activities that in my mind are causing unacceptable damage to humans or the environment and therefore need to be changed in order to become sustainable. The second subject I want to address today is water. And when you look at many of the uses of water today in the West and the Southwest, it's hard, for me at least, to argue that those practices are sustainable over the long term. Referring again to this same list, I think I'll try to find an example in category 2 where we are using up a valuable resource, and also in category 3 where we're using it in a way and in a quantity that creates an unacceptable shortage of the resource. So first I want to talk about groundwater depletion. Second, I'll talk about some of the aspects of water shortage that are facing us in the West. And I hesitate to do any of this with Mike here because he's spending 24 hours a day trying to solve some of these problems in California and elsewhere. I've always liked the story of the farmer who won $1 million in the lottery. He was being interviewed by a local reporter, and the reporter said, "Well, what are your plans now that you've won this $1 million of lottery money?" He thought for a little bit, and then he said, Well, I guess I'll just keep farming until it's all gone. Unfortunately, I fear there are some lessons buried in that story which relate to this sustainability issue. In much of the country, particularly here in the West, our water supply comes from underground aquifers, which recharge very slowly, if at all. The heavy use of those finite sources of water to meet growing demands sets up a classic unsustainable situation. My first real focus on this problem was a result of the dropping water table, which eastern New Mexico communities have seen for many years. Communities like Clovis, New Mexico, and Portales, and Grady, and Melrose, these are communities that are on the eastern edge of New Mexico as it bumps up against Texas. They're also on the western edge of the Ogallala Aquifer. Let me show you this map of the Ogallala Aquifer, which many of you may be familiar with. It's a USGS map. It shows that there are significant areas of the Ogallala, particularly in West Texas, where the water table has dropped more than 100 feet and continues to drop. And when you go to West Texas, the reason for this depletion of the underground aquifer is very obvious. Everywhere you look, you see land which gets no more precipitation than is needed to maintain a mesquite bush, being irrigated for long periods each year because there's a long growing season. And since the maps show that the problem is most severe in West Texas, which I think has the most red area on the map, since it's most severe in West Texas, you might wonder why I, as a senator representing New Mexico, would be paying attention to it. Well, the answer is that at the border of Texas and New Mexico, the underground aquifer slants down toward Texas. So pumping water from the aquifer in Texas causes the water table under New Mexico to deplete as well. The metaphor, of course, is straws, all the straws taking water out of the same bucket. So when you hear this, you can understand the plaintiff plea that New Mexicans have made for nearly 4 centuries now. Poor New Mexico, so far from God, so near to Texas. I was hoping Ken Salazar would be here to hear that. His family originated in our state, and I think he would relate to that. Mike, of course, is from our great state and can relate to that. Given current rates of aquifer depletion, in a few decades, farming in many of the areas that are shown on this map, farming will cease. In addition, the communities that are located on land that overlays the aquifer will face severe water shortages. Frankly, part of the problem is that we have a multi-state aquifer, and we have many individual states which jealously guard their authority to control water policy related to the water within their borders. I can't offer you a simple solution to the problem as part of these comments this evening, but I think creating a greater awareness that these practices are unsustainable is part of the solution. Final issue on sustainability that I wanted to address is the general problem of water shortage that we face in the West and Southwest. Here I'm talking about surface water primarily. Simply put, the demand for water is growing. The precipitation that we're receiving in most of the West, or many parts of the West, is decreasing. Many of the activities and practices currently in place involving use of water will be unsustainable in future years. Simply put, also, the gap between the supply of water and the demand for water will continue to widen. It is wide today, but it will be wider in the future. In agriculture, there will have to be more water efficient methods employed. because there's less water available for that sector of the economy. There will have to be less acreage under irrigation in the West than there are today. Today, agriculture is by far the largest user of water in the West, but as the population continues to grow, the share of the pie that will be available to agriculture will have to be reduced. Many towns and communities in my state and throughout the West depend for their water on a combination of vulnerable watersheds and limited resources from groundwater. One example that comes to mind in my state is the town of Las Vegas, New Mexico. That community and many others have already made significant per capita water consumption reductions, but much more must be done in the future in order for those communities to survive. Water shortage in the large metropolitan areas in the West and Southwest will also have to decrease to get to sustainable levels. One good example of this is the area that includes Phoenix and Tucson, the area that Arizonans like to refer to as the Sun Corridor. Bill Dubuis, who we are proud to have as a resident of our state, in his recent book, The Great Aridness, which I recommend to any of you who haven't read it, he does a very good job of summing up the sustainability problem faced by this growing megalopolis in Arizona. I want to read you a couple of paragraphs from that recent book. He says, things will be fine for the roughly 3.5 million people who drink and cook and wash with Central Arizona Project water, only for as long as, number one, the predictions of the climate change models prove groundless, number two, the kinds of droughts documented by the paleo record do not recur, and number three, the cities of Central Arizona don't grow so much that they consume their agricultural buffer, which is their main protection against the uncertain years ahead. Then he talks about the effect of the Colorado River Compact, which of course apportioned water among the various states, the 7 states that share in Colorado River water, and separated that water into an upper basin and a lower basin. This Colorado River Compact was signed in Santa Fe at Bishop's Lodge in 1922. That may be one of the more important things that happened in our state, but that was nearly 100 years ago. He goes on to say, yet another problem amplifies all these liabilities. The persistent overdraft of resources in the lower basin, the three states in the lower basin, including Arizona, if unaddressed, means that increased water consumption in the upper basin, which is universally expected, will at some point remove water on a gallon-to-gallon basis from the intakes of the state of Arizona. From a lower basin perspective, upper basin development operates exactly like climate change. It means less water in Lake Mead. So this becomes a fourth condition, that the upper basin continue to send downstream its excess water, which the lower basin will then use to meet its overgrown demand. Believing that this situation is sustainable is like believing in the tooth fairy. But the lower basin, locked in a vice of its own making, presses on as though tomorrow morning there will be money under its pillow. If any of these 4 conditions fail to be met, let alone if 2 or more fail in concert, people living in what Arizonans proudly call the Sun Corridor, the emerging megalopolis anchored by Phoenix and Tucson, will find it difficult to keep their thirsts slaked and their cities running. So in our use of natural resources, whether we focus on our energy needs or our needs for water, much of what we've traditionally done and what we are continuing to do, in my view, is no longer sustainable. And transitioning from unsustainable activities and practices to sustainable practices is not easy. First, it's not easy to bring people to recognize that a particular practice is not sustainable. and this is particularly the case where their livelihood or future prosperity depends on continuing with the unsustainable practice. Second, even where there is a recognition that what's being done is unsustainable, there can be powerful forces that resist a change in that practice. I hope very much that the conference that we're beginning now and that will go tomorrow will help us to identify a viable path to move from unsustainable practices to sustainable practices in the many areas of natural resource usage, the two I've discussed and others as well. Again, I congratulate the law school for focusing our attention on this very challenging task, and I appreciate the chance to speak. Thank you.
So for those who missed Senator Bingaman's Schultz lecture, it's still online. It's another tour de force. I thought William Boyd's framing of this issue was exactly the sort of challenge that we were grappling with. And you would have thought that this was a well-choreographed introduction. Instead, it was just a good choice of an opening speaker. I'm glad you didn't say no, Jeff, because that was really a fabulous way to get us started. He has agreed to take some questions.
Economic policy can affect that on the demand side, like from a sustainability perspective. Can we increase the demand enough that would the pricing would make sense for them to stop playing and demanding, or is this going to be more environmental impact and other sustainable practices outside of economics that will really have to affect it?
Let me repeat it because people may not have caught it on our new high-tech video system now. Obviously, there's an economic dimension there, which is when you have low gas prices, the flaring is more likely. Have you worked through the economics? At what price for natural gas does the problem take care of itself?
Well, I don't claim enough expertise to answer that question. I do think that obviously as the price of natural gas goes up, there's more incentive to try to build the infrastructure to capture the natural gas more quickly. But I think at the current time, there's not that much incentive to build that infrastructure. If you've got to choose between building infrastructure to capture the oil or building infrastructure to capture the natural gas and get it to markets, you opt for the oil. And that's what's happening.
Great. All right. Questions from the audience. We'll start over here.
Senator Bingaman, you addressed the use of water for agriculture, but I wondered if you could speak about the water that's being used to extract natural gas and oil via fracking, the 3 to 5 million gallons per well, and then when it gets refracked, it's even more.
No, I do think that particularly when you're dependent upon underground aquifers, there's no question that that's an additional factor, that there are additional demands for water that result from the increased drilling activity that's going on. I think, in fairness to the oil and gas industry, that is a fairly small part of the problem compared to the amount of water we're using in agriculture. But it is clearly a factor. There's no doubt about that.
Yep.
I had a follow-up question to the one asked from behind me here having to do with venting and flaring. Well, wondering if there's some way to come up with a concept of wise use, somewhat analogous to beneficial use that is true of water resources. I'm a chemist, and I think one of the things that we need to be much more cognizant of is venting of helium, which happens in many natural gas situations, and that in fact we shouldn't be allowing either oil production or gas production without full use of the resource, just on a sustainability wise use basis of some sort.
I'm not sure what the question there was. I don't disagree that we ought to have better control over whatever's produced out of a well that, particularly if it's going to be a well that's drilled on federal land or on state land, I think regulators can do substantially more than they have done to ensure that everything produced is put to beneficial use. I would certainly agree with that, and certainly I think there are cases pending now where folks, private landowners, are claiming they need to be paid a royalty, not just on what's sold, but on what's produced, and that's another issue which I think is going to get more and more attention.
For entrepreneurial lawyers out there, it seems like that's an opportunity, right? Because they're getting cheated out of that cost, out of that potential royalty, because it's not getting actually used, even though it's produced. All right, got some more students in the back.
Senator Bingaman, you talked about increasing agricultural transfers as a way to deal with water issues in the West. A lot of this is because of the entrenchment of prior appropriation. People don't want to transfer their water rights because you don't use it, you'll lose it. What are policy ways we can encourage transfers from agriculture to cities, agriculture to higher valued use, such as reform of BLM pricing or innovative ways we deal with this problem?
Well, I can't tell you policies as such. I think that the truth is, as water rights, at least in our state, in New Mexico, as water rights become more and more valuable, there is more and more incentive for folks who own those water rights to make them available for other purposes. And I think you've got some of that happening. And obviously, you got to have a regulatory system and a statutory system in place that allows for the transfer of property of those water rights from one use to another, but I can't tell you a general policy solution to that problem. I think it probably differs state to state. Each state's got its own laws governing that issue.
Dean, I have the mic, so I'm going next, whether you call on me or not. Senator, I know you've been deeply involved for many years in the formulation and implementation of particularly renewable energy policy in this country. And I wonder if you'd just give us a few comments on the current status or lack thereof of any kind of comprehensive policy as it relates to renewables in connection with an overall energy policy. Kind of where do you think we are now and where are we going?
Well, I don't think we have any national policy with regard to renewables as such. The two things that the federal government, the main things the federal government has done to encourage more use of renewables have been through the tax code. The production tax credit, which has been a significant reason for a lot of the wind farm and wind energy production that's taken place in the country in recent years. And then the investment tax credit, which of course is the one that the solar facilities take advantage of. The production tax credit expired at the end of 2013, and I think they're struggling to see if they can find the votes in the Congress to keep it, to reimpose that production tax credit before people have to pay taxes for 2014. I hope they're able to, but there's no policy in place. I mean, we have a record of adopting or enacting these production tax credits and letting them expire and bringing them back and letting them expire again, and it's not a very meritorious approach to the thing. The investment tax credit, we were able, when we put it in place, we were able to do it for 8 years, and it doesn't expire till the end of 2016. So there's been more continuity there, and I think you're seeing some increased activity with regard to solar projects because of that. At the state level, the renewable portfolio standard that has been adopted in about 30 states is the biggest policy driver that's occurred, but it varies dramatically from state to state, and there are 20 states that don't have anything of that type on the books.
All right, one last question.
Yes. I wonder if you have comments on two aspects of natural gas extraction. One is the contribution to greenhouse gas through flaring, and the other is the question of pollution of underground water through fracking.
You've talked about the first point a little bit. Anything else you want to say about flaring, and what do you want to say about underwater sources and fracking?
In terms of pollution of underwater.
Well, you know, I don't claim particular expertise on that second one especially, or the first one either. I think on the second one, which I haven't really talked about yet, Secretary Chu, the Secretary of Energy, the previous Secretary of Energy, appointed a Blue Ribbon Commission, and it had very credible people on it. Dan Yergin was on the panel. Various folks were on the panel who really know something about energy. They did an analysis of what the effects of fracking were as they saw it, and they concluded that the main adverse impact was a result of the release of methane, which was not being properly restricted. So it was a problem with air, the release of methane which causes is one of the causes of the global warming issue. They did not find that there was a problem with contamination of potable groundwater as part of it. That was a rare circumstance where someone had really fouled up in the drilling process. If a well is properly drilled, there should not be any contamination of the groundwater itself. And so that was their set of conclusions. I have no reason to contradict them. That would be where I would come out as well.
So a couple things. First, a hearty appreciation for Senator Bingaman's wonderful talk. Thank you, Senator. Second, a couple of questions tee up our Summer March Conference on June 5th and 6th, which will talk about issues around hydraulic fracturing and underground water sources, air quality. It's going to be a terrific collaboration with some of the other folks on campus working on this. Please mark that date. We also have, I think we may have mentioned Bruce Babbitt coming in a couple of weeks. The date, Charles, is March 17th. And of course, we have a whole day's worth of great conversations tomorrow. For tonight in the reception, here's my request. How many students are in the audience? All right, if all the non-students could help seek out the students and try to chat with them, we find that to be a more effective form of encouraging relationship building. And if you're willing to do that, I really appreciate it. As William said, they're fabulous, great group of students, and they are the Mike Connors of tomorrow and a lot of the other great lawyers who are here today. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you in the reception.